think what we're learning already is that the modern era of war needs to be redefined and rethought of as something much brighter, broader than just the military.
The head of NATO has warned members are not ready for the threats it'll face from Russia in the coming years and that it's time to adopt a wartime mindset. Mark Rutte said NATO countries should be spending much higher on defence than the current target of 2% of GDP.
We are not ready for what is coming our way in 4 to 5 years. Danger is moving towards us at full speed. We must not look the other way. We must face it. What is happening in Ukraine could happen here too. And regardless of the outcome of this war, we will not be safe in the future unless we are prepared to deal with danger.
Mark Rutte speaking earlier there. Well, Jonathan Shaw is former Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff and joins me now. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening.
Let's talk about the UK's readiness. Quite some words here from Mark Rutte. Are we ready in the UK to be on a wartime footing?
Yes, I think we need to remind ourselves what a wartime footing might look like. All the focus is on defence spending, but actually I think what we're learning already is that the modern era of war needs to be redefined and rethought of as something much brighter, broader than just the military. It's a whole of society activity. And so this is about the mobilizing the potential of the whole of society, not just increasing spending on defence. So from that point of view, I think he's absolutely right that we're still thinking of war as a sort of military-only activity. We only need to look at the interference of what's happening, cutting cables in the Baltic Sea, things like that. Those are warlike activities. Make no mistake about it. And we need to take a much broader look at war and mobilize society to cope with it.
How do we do that? If we're to explain what you mean by that, it's not just defence spending, it's not just the instruction that comes from government on how much is spent on weapons and on defensive measures. It's also about our mindset, about our readiness. What are we talking about there specifically? What haven't we got at the moment, Jonathan Shaw, that we really should be turning our attention to?
Okay, well, we've already started with made a start in the field of cyber. We have finally tried to catch up with the Estonians, who, when they were taken to cleaners by the Russians in 2007, they formed a cyber defense league, which was basically everyone who was concerned with IT became a civilian adjunct to the state's cyber force. So it didn't matter how many earrings or ponytails or whatever you had, if you were capable at cyber, you became part of the National Reserve. We need to adopt that sort of model. Well, we've done that now, eventually in Britain, and that sort of cyber reserve, I understand, is taking shape, and that's good. And we need to do that all the way along. There's all sorts of resilience we can give ourselves. You can think of engineering, you could think of manufacturing, you could think of, the cottage industries. We could do all sorts of things if people were going to take this seriously. So there's all sorts we can do.
What else concerns you when you look at the picture, when you look at the UK's readiness for war, which is very plainly what we're talking about here, isn't it? Let's not kid ourselves. We're not opening up a storybook. We are having a serious conversation about being ready for war. Where else are we lacking?
Well, let's talk about defence then. I mean, it was talking about the aiming for 3%. We in Britain are very complacent about the fact that our current defence spending is over 2% of the of GDP. But we just need to take into account two things. First of all, in 1982, when we were fighting the Falklands War, we were something over 4% of GDP. And the comparable figure now, and I'll explain this in a minute, is that we're on 1.7% of GDP. And by saying that, that's much less than the government announces, because hidden in there, in 2010 in the Defence Review, George Osborne as Chancellor added the nuclear capability, the cost of the nuclear deterrent, onto the defence budget. So that is a hidden cost which absorbs a big and increasing amount of the defence budget. So if you're going to compare our defence spending now to what our defence spending was the last time we faced a fully geared up Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, then we are way behind the curve on this sort of investment. So I think we really do have to get very serious about how much we're spending on defence, not disregarding the fact that we are short of money anyway.
Where does the immediate threat come from? I'm just keen to sort of drill into your expertise, your experience, and also you will have a strong sense of where the threats are at the moment. We can talk about Russia, we can talk about the situation in the Middle East, but also China as well. That is something that Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, talked about today. We must be clear-eyed about China's ambitions, says Beijing was building up its forces with no transparency and no limitations. Where is the immediate threat if we're trying to get our heads around this picture at the moment?
So in the grand strategic position, there was a while ago when we were going to be really on the case of global Britain, we were investing in our ability to intervene in the Far East. I think that was way over ambitious for us. And indeed, Lloyd Austin, the Sec Dev in the United States, said that he wished the United Kingdom would focus on the defense of Europe rather than try and help out in the Pacific, which was, and I think he was absolutely right. That was right when he said it, and I think it's even more the case now as the Russian threat grows. So that's the first point, concentrate on Europe. On Europe, I think there are two threats. One is what we do about ourselves and our own defense. But I think more immediately, the immediate challenge is to ensure that Europe supports Ukraine, because that is the crucial battle that if we win, as in if we don't lose in Ukraine, and that's a whole different question of what those words mean. But if Russia is seen to win in Ukraine, then I think that's when we really will need to look to our own national defense, because this won't be the end of it. And so that's why the key point at the moment is to put resources into supporting Ukraine.
What does that look like? This won't be the end of it. If Putin is or perceives that he has victory in Ukraine, maybe he can hang on to the territory that he has claimed as Russian occupied already. Maybe there are concessions. Maybe the arrival of Donald Trump means that process is accelerated. Where would he or what would he be emboldened to do next, do you fear?
Going to use a strange word here, but he'd nibble. He would nibble to test us and test our abilities. He'd nibble at Georgia.
How would he do that, though, Jonathan?
Well, you've seen already what his tactics are. If it's little green men or it's he would take a little bit. He would chomp a little bit and try and break. Well, what people tend to do. This is I remember an Israeli describing the way the Iranians reacted to red lines. They break red lines down into little pink lines. And they do a little one, they nibble it, and it's not quite big enough to trigger a big response. What I think they'd actually do, if you look at a map of Europe, Belarus at the moment is stuck out right into the west and looks quite exposed. To its north, it's got the Baltics, and to the south, it's got Ukraine. If Ukraine goes to the west, joins NATO, then it leaves Belarus looking very exposed. If Ukraine falls to Russia, then it is the Baltics that look very exposed and very vulnerable to some sort of lightning attack from Kaliningrad in the west, that little enclave that the Russians have there, or from the east. So you can see the temptation would be there, and the temptation in Transnistria down there, or in Moldova, and also down in Georgia. So you can see all sorts of opportunities for mischief making by Russia, and that would really force us to consider, how wide are our defences? We made these commitments under NATO, so we want to honour them.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, really we need to concentrate on Europe, and that means Vladimir Putin and Russia. This is despite an unstable region in the Middle East. This is despite the threat of China and their ambitions, of course, which know no limitations, as Mark Rutte said today. You strongly feel that this wartime mindset really first and foremost needs to be concentrating on Europe.
Well, yes, but go back to what I said right at the start. The Chinese in particular do not see war as just an activity of the military. The very strong doctrine that they have, which sees sort of competition between the states taking place on all vectors of society. So, their cyber attacks, where they have successfully stolen our intellectual property over the years, and that's one of the reasons why they are now the manufacturing center of the world and are looking set to do serious damage to the industrial base of Europe, which has a fundamental effect to us and will affect us all in the years to come. So that's an instance where we need to take China very seriously in a non-military sense, but in an industrial sense, in industrial espionage sense, in a cyber sense. So yes, we have to take China seriously, but in terms of military aspects, I think our military focus should perhaps be in Europe, and we should, as the Americans have encouraged us to do, leave the China issue to the Americans.
Really good to speak to you. Thank you, Jonathan Shaw, former Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff. Good to talk to you.